Hi, I am Carl Dobrowolski, and I am with Greg Kelley, the CEO of Unknown Nations. He's not only a dear friend, but he is an author of a cutting-edge, revolutionary book called Last Four Words. This book has the potential to change your thinking on missions. And we have a few questions to ask of Greg Kelley. First of all, welcome, Greg.
Hey, thanks, Carl. It's great to be with you, my friend. So fun.
It is. It's fun. It's exciting. And you wrote a book that, again, can turn anyone's perspective on mission irretrievably. You've written some amazing things in Last Four Words. What motivated you to write this book?
Well, I think just when you look around, Carl, I've been doing this since 1995. I became the first volunteer here at Unknown Nations. So it's been, an opportunity to really observe the body of Christ. And the conclusion that I've really come to is that too few of us as followers of Jesus have any expressions of this idea, the unreached people groups of the world, people without access to the gospel. And that is in the time, I might add, where we're sending more Bibles, more missionaries, more resources than any time in history, yet very few of those are getting to the places where the gospel's not been. And so I really wanted to write a book that pointed that out, that showcased it, not in sort of a guilt trip kind of a way, but just in an opportunity way. And I think it's because the lens that we look at foreign missions through and how we've been conditioned is almost putting us into a place of satisfaction when we're going to places where Jesus and through the great work of missionaries before us have been, succeeded. There's indigenous church planting movements, yet we continue to kind of go back to that place instead of maybe looking at it through a different lens and saying, well, what's the spiritual condition of the rest of the world? And so this book is really trying to unpack that and motivate people to look differently at foreign missions.
And how is your book different from other missions books?
What's that?
How is your book different from other books that are written about missions, world missions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of good resources that are out there that are maybe, talking about like, here's how we can do things. Here's why we could do things. But I don't think there's really many resources out there about the whole where. And again, getting back to this idea of, the Somalias of the world. What distinguishes Somalia from Kenya? It's real important. And I think there's a lot of books and resources talking about maybe the how to do things, but we're not talking about the where. And that really is the big missing piece.
Greg, you make much of Jesus's last words. Last words are important. You make a point of that in the book.
Yeah.
What were Jesus's last words? And judging by what his last words, you're going to explain what that is. How are we doing? How are we doing against those last words?
I think a lot of people, Carl, would go to the Great Commission, and maybe rightly so, because it's the last words in the Gospel of Matthew where he tells us to go to all nations and make disciples. But that's not the last thing he said. It's the resurrected Jesus, and it's in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, where he says, when you receive the Holy Spirit and power, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and ends of the earth. So those are the last four words that Jesus said, because in Acts 1:9 it says, and then in their presence a cloud emerged and Jesus ascended into heaven. So the ends of the earth really are like vastly, hugely important. And it was the last thing on Jesus' mind before he ascended into heaven. And the reality of it, Carl, is that the ends of the earth is growing at the same proportional level as Christianity. And so on one hand, we can be encouraged and say, the gospel is having huge impact in the world. There's more Christians than any time in history, but also, unfortunately, the ends of the earth is growing at the same proportional rate.
Is it possible that there are, and maybe you can quantify it, is it possible there are millions of people on this earth that have never heard the name Jesus?
Yeah, I mean, as shocking as that is here, more than 2,000 years after Jesus told us to go to all nations, that's the exact reality. They say the number is over 2 billion, which seems staggering, and it is. And now let me just point out, Carl, that these are not just non-Christians.
Right.
Someone being a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Muslim,
Right.
or even your next door neighbor who refuses to go to church. That's not what makes it the ends of the earth. What makes it the ends of the earth is they don't have access to the gospel. No one's made an effort. They've never met a Christian. They've never seen a Bible.
Right.
There's never been a missionary initiative to reach them. That's why it's critical and why Jesus uses last words to prioritize it.
So how are we doing? How are we doing as a church?
Well, we are having successes. I'll give you an example. So in 1900, and this is in chapter 9 of Last 4 Words, so you have to look at it. But in 1900, the country of Congo was around 1% Christian. And that was the generation and era, Carl, of the one-way missionaries, they called them. They were so committed, they packed their stuff and their belongings in a casket. I mean, that's a pretty committed individual. And they would go
committed.
Fast forward 100 years, and you look at the country of Congo, 95% Christian. So there's many instances of places that we've made huge progress. However, there's a lot of countries that remain. In fact, I did a search recently, and I looked at all of the countries that were less than 5% Christian, about 45 countries. Not one of them is in North America, South America, or even sub-Saharan Africa. And so the places that need the most work are places that we're not allocating enough resources into. So it's a mixed bag. In some places we're winning, and other places we have huge work that needs to be done.
And that's why Last 4 Words is so important. Incidentally, Last 4 Words is available on Amazon. It's available in hardcover, softcover, Kindle, and audio. It's a must read. Anyone that is listening, watching, this is something that you want to buy for yourself and for others. Your pastor, the leaders in your life, those who are kingdom-minded, Great Commission Christians, they must read this book. As you've heard from Greg, we have a lot of work to do. We have been telling ourselves that the church is growing, but as you've heard Greg, that 1040 window, the unreached people groups of this world, the numbers are increasing, and we cannot allow status quo. Greg, what is the greatest challenge to fulfilling the Great Commission?
Well, I think there's several things to that, Carl, but one forefront is that we need to stop doing missions oriented towards country. And we need to start doing missions oriented toward nations. Now, that might seem like something small. It is massively important because of the 195 countries in the world, there are over 17,000 nations. And that's the word Jesus used in the Great Commission, make disciples of all nations. It's not about the countries because there are many people groups. That's the key, people groups inside of countries that are more Christian than where I live in West Michigan. 98% Christian, 99% Christian. And if we just travel to a place or resource a place that could be halfway around the world, it may in fact be more Christian than our own community. And so we have to assess missions through the lens of nations. And furthermore, what is the spiritual condition of that nation? And we also need a renewed call to prayer, Carl. Jesus told us to pray to the Lord of the harvest to send forth laborers before he told us to go. And I think the church needs to, this spirit of a revival really needs to be reactivated like it was in the Moravians in the 1700s. Carl, they are known as the first real pioneer missionaries, the Moravians, and out of Germany. And in the 1700s, they started a prayer meeting that was to last a week, a 24/7 prayer meeting that would last. That's how committed they were. That prayer meeting lasted 110 years. And the Moravians launched out missionaries after missionaries into unreached people groups around the world with success that we've never seen since. Why? Because we lack that same vigor of prayer. So we need to understand it's about nations. We need to be praying. There's barriers that obviously are preventing us from reaching some of these areas, but those really are the two big things that I think will reignite this idea of getting to the ends of the earth.
Yeah, may the Lord raise up yet another Moravian-like movement so that we might pray. We won't have the power to go if we don't pray. And that's one thing that Last 4 Words It'll motivate you, but it'll also cause you to pray. We must pray for the Lord of the harvest to send out workers. Final question is very important. It really brings things home for us, Greg. How can everyday followers, you're a leader, you're a missions leader. One could say this is your job.
Yeah.
But how do everyday followers of Jesus be involved in bringing the gospel to the ends of the earth?
Well, I think it really begins with education. We need to understand what some of these mission fields are. Instead of saying Nigeria, we need to be praying to the Lord of the harvest for the Fulani, for the Hausa, for the Kanuri, three incredibly large Muslim, 99% Muslim people groups, and calling that by name. Lord, I pray over the Fulani people. I pray over the Kanuri people versus a generic prayer that we're just praying over Nigeria. And that Joshua Project is an amazing resource. It's referenced many times throughout the book that we use because Joshua Project identifies what those people groups are. And advocacy is another thing. Hey, you don't have to be David Livingstone, one of the greatest missionaries in history, to Africa, or Greg Kelley leading Unknown Nations, and applies to everyone. So none of us are precluded, Carl, from having an expression of "and the ends of the earth." So as you're educating yourself and advocating and sharing with your people, I promise you, they don't think this way. Everybody in your church is a target, and prayer. So we all of us can be praying to the Lord of the harvest. And obviously, if they want to support Unknown Nations, they can go to unknownnations.com, support us, whether it's the widow's mite or whether, it's a inheritance stock gift. We'll put it all to use to sending out our resources into these areas that Jesus used his last words to identify.
Apart from what you just mentioned about Unknown Nations, is there anything else that you want to tell us about Unknown Nations and your mission?
Yeah, there's a podcast resource that's launching in January of 2024. That's going to be a weekly episodes to sort of ignite you, invigorate you, give you current event sort of information. But just be praying for us as you read last four words. Carl and I believe that is going to stimulate something inside of you that may be dormant. Maybe you're activated in missions, but maybe you need to reallocate yourself. That's a big issue in missions. Maybe you're doing great things in Haiti. Haiti is not the ends of the earth. So I think there's things that this book can bring out of you so that you can be a participant in Jesus' last words.
A participant as well as an advocate to reach the ends of the earth. You've been listening to Greg Kelley, CEO of Unknown Nations. You can learn more about Unknown Nations as well as the book by going to unknownnations.com. And we encourage you, today is one day before Thanksgiving. We're heading into the Advent season. People are thinking about gifts. Buy a book for someone. You can buy a hardcover, soft cover, a Kindle copy, or the very popular audiobook format of Last Four Words. Guaranteed your world will be challenged. Buy a book for yourself, buy a book for someone else, and let's reach the ends of the earth, praying to the Lord of the harvest to send not only workers, but ourselves, and maybe in partnership with Unknown Nations. God bless you. Greg, thank you very much, and a very happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thanks, Carl.